Tettles, this is going to be a slugfest of trash. Now, of course, for those at home, we're back in the Teeming affix, meaning there's more trash present in the dungeon, but it also requires you to clear more trash in order to hit your break points of 20% for those reaping packs, and of course, complete the 100% for the dungeon. Also, Grievous. Now, Grievous is particularly nasty because as soon as you hit that 90% max HP threshold mark, you start to tick down at an increasing rate up to 4 stacks, and just makes it so hard for the healer to catch up. But big pull coming in here for Method NA as they grab everything together and just get that Bloodlust rolling. We're going to see that Unholy DK in action here in a second, but I mean, the Protware and the Rogue certainly holding their own as well.
Yeah, this 4 Peacekeeper pull is actually critical for Method NA. It's where you end up getting a ton of your count, using the Unholy Death Knight in order to be able to grip the mech jockey close to the Peacekeeper robot in order for him to be able to pilot the Peacekeeper is actually critical. You get a ton of your count in Motherlode traditionally just from these Peacekeeper plus mech jockey pulls, and using this Unholy Death Knight to their fullest potential is actually critically important. On the side of Team Puluka, they did such a small pull for the Bloodlust by comparison to what Method NA did. For sure. Yeah, and Bloodlust is done, and they're doing a fairly meaty pull here coming as well, looking to proc their first reaping. 16% already on Method NA, and, you know, depending on the dungeon, oftentimes the 2-3% worth of trash, not too big of a deal, but if there's any dungeon where it matters, a lot of it is in Motherlode, especially Teeming here. Just to get 1-2% here and there is an absolute struggle, the amount of trash that is required for this dungeon. Here comes the first reaping wave for Method NA with the mass amount that they pulled. They run in and want to make it as efficient as possible. Double Assassin pack coming up here for Method NA, particularly dangerous, not just because of the poison blades, but you want to make sure that somebody hard crowd controls those flechettes that go off, else there will just be way too much damage on the group that snowballs into that Grievous. Yeah, this is a pretty thick pull too. It's double Peacekeeper, double Assassin, and 1 Thug, so you might actually see somebody maybe miss their kick on the Assassin if they do in fact get stunned by that Thug there. So making sure that you have even backup kicks, or make sure that the kicks are coordinated for the Toxic Blades, or even if you do actually let one of the Toxic Blades casts go off, you end up knocking that Hail cast, is critically important on the side of Method NA. It would be rather toxic. Don't want that happening. Team Puluka now dealing with their first reaping wave here at 25%, trying to make the most efficient use of it possible as well. Now, there are, as you kind of mentioned earlier, Tettles, it's really important that you get those mech jockeys in the Peacekeepers, because all you need to do is kill the Peacekeeper, which is not that easy because they're dangerous in the first place, but you get basically both percentages worth of trash because the mech jockey automatically dies when that Peacekeeper dies too, so you get a nice bump up on your trash percent, which is why you see these teams pull these large dangerous mobs, because the high risk is worth the high reward here. Method NA using one of their Shrouds as they start to kind of get likely a central position here with what I expect to be some pretty large cooldowns coming up. Maybe not actually. They kind of stealth just safely over to the last pack before the first boss. Typically though, we do see most teams getting around 80, 90 sometimes % of the trash done before the first boss, so we'll see exactly when they decide to get onto that unit. Yeah, so for most groups, they ended up pulling like 4th-ish reaping into Coin Pummeler, but Method NA here jockeying for position here, looking like it's positioning itself close to Coin Pummeler, maybe looking to take their 2nd reaping into it. And like you were talking about, making sure that they are utilizing the mech jockeys inside the Peacekeepers ends up like almost saving you a whole entire pull worth of trash if you are able to get them to pilot those Peacekeeper robots. Yeah, they are mech jockeying into position indeed. Team Puluka here at 30%, Method NA 37. Looks like they will prop their 2nd round of reaping as they stand to kind of invade the room of Coin Pummeler here, the first boss, dealing with the rest of the trash as they back up. But lot of trash coming in here. Is that 1, 2, 3, 4 Peacekeeper pull again as Nerf Clap. Now, Nerf Clap kind of kiting around in circles around the boss room here. Now, these Peacekeepers are very dangerous if they actually connect with the tank, but because of the frequency of their casts and their general lumbering slow movement, it is pretty easy for the tank to actually just get away. So this is a 5 Peacekeeper pull, and they don't have any splash damage on melee, so the melee can just kind of have full uptime on them as long as they're not attacking from the front with the shield, which makes them immune, and of course avoiding the AoE destroying on the ground. But you know, this looks like a great pull, but part of the problem with it is the Warrior, who outputs so much damage, is just kind of not really doing anything. They're just running around inside on the corners, not getting a lot of damage in, so hopefully worth the efficiency for them as that 40% reaping wave comes in. Similar on the side of Team Puluka, here comes the 40% reaping wave. Yeah, like you were saying, the Warrior's damage is lacking, but additionally the mobs aren't even clumped up, so they end up having to almost kill the Peacekeepers 1 or 2 at a time because they aren't clumped up. While it might be a little bit more efficient for you to be able to get 5 Peacekeepers at once, because that's like really efficient in terms of pulling, they're definitely not the most efficient in terms of like the mobs aren't clumped up enough for the group. Obviously, on the side of Team Pualuka, they do their reaping into a pack. You see their one Peacekeeper plus their reaping here. Obviously, this is a pretty clean pull. Team Pualuka just, I would say they're actually pretty far behind Method NA here.
Maybe, I don't know. It's just taking so long to choose these Peacekeepers. Both teams are 1% trash difference between the two. I see what you're saying. There's going to be a nice surge of trash percentage here in a moment for Method NA as they skyrocket above 50%, these Peacekeepers falling. So certainly, hopefully, worth the percentage in the end. They're going to proc their third reaping with this Peacekeeper here, and what it looks like, likely take it into the boss and just cleave everything down together as they get out of combat momentarily. Coin-operated Crowd Pummeler indeed does get pulled here for Method NA, but I mean, that took a while. Team Pualuka, you are right, is behind. Not too behind, though, but let's focus on this boss here. We're in a Tyrannical setting, and this boss particularly has some interesting mechanics, most importantly with, of course, those foot bombs that go down, that all eyes, of course, on the North American team and how well they're going to kick those balls back into the boss.
Yeah, Grievous plus the foot bombs, like you were saying, is by far the most important thing here. You see the static pulse going out here, knocking everybody into Grievous, knocking them all back, making them take increased damage, and then he's going to be summoning the foot bombs here in a second. And JB tweeted about this. He was tweeting about, imagine whenever foot bombs come out and your whole entire group has 4-stack Grievous. And it's like, and that's exactly the case here, making sure that everybody is high on health whenever the static blast comes out, while JB has to run around and kick these foot bombs is critically important. And making sure that he calls out if he does need help or something like that, because if the foot bombs go off, it does a decent amount of AoE damage, plus it makes you so basically, once you kick the foot bombs into the boss has an increased damage taken phase where he takes a ton of increased damage. So missing any of the foot bombs is actually just tragic.
Trank comes out of here. JB tries to top off the rest of the group. And just to add on to the importance of the foot bombs, I think we've said the word foot bombs 48 times in the past 30 seconds here or so. But they do add a stacking damage taken, as Tettles mentioned, 50% per stack. The key here is to kick 2 in right away so you get that duration rolling. And then you kick the last one in right before the duration's about to run out. Now, they kicked it a bit early there just to maximize the amount of damage intake uptime on the boss. You can see the team doing well here from Nerf Clap, kiting the boss around minimally as possible, around in a circle, getting away from those coin piles as the boss will absorb those coins, and for every pile that he successfully absorbs will increase his damage by 10% per stack. Certainly something you don't want in this 19 Tyrannical with already the damage that the Static Shock puts out that snowballs into that Grievous.
Yeah, so on the side of Team Pualuka, they ended up proccing their third reaping of the instance, finally tying up and slightly passing the count that Method NA has been pulling. But you do see on the side of Method NA, they're at 15% on coin-operated Crowd Pummeler. So they're actually, I would say they're end up about being like 30-ish seconds ahead. And you actually do see Frush go down, the Monk going down on the side of Team Pualuka. They end up electing to use a Battle Res in order to get him back up as quickly as possible. He needs to get back up. You actually do see one of the Rogues here popping their cheat death as well. Obviously not optimal, but as long as that nobody else goes down here and you have to run all the way back, it's actually just going to be okay, but obviously not the most optimal thing on the side of Team Pualuka.
Yeah, losing a lot of time just kiting back and forth here as they had to res Frush. We have, of course, the cheat death for Sinky, as you mentioned, Tettle. So a little sloppiness from Team Pualuka, certainly costing them a lot of time, while Method NA cleanly moved through the coin-operated pummeler. Now up to 61% trash. Of course, they pulled that third reaping wave into the boss. Opted not to do more trash in the front of the dungeon that I mentioned earlier. We actually see teams kind of deal with in the 80-90% mark. So they're going to have to deal with a lot more trash leading up to the second boss, Azrock here. But Nerf Clap kind of desperately running around in circles right now. Cannot get healed out of that 4-stack Grievous. Finally gets a bomb of a heal on him as they manage to go through here. Frush down again on the side of Team Pualuka. No battle res available for them. It's going to slow them down a fair bit as they clean up the rest of that pack too. Mass stealth coming up here for Method NA as they go straight up the hill to Azrock. So looks like they're doing a bit of a, I would say, non-traditional route in terms of trash percentages here. Most teams come up here in the mid to late 90s worth of percent and then kind of cap off their last reaping, just getting rid of it with Shadow Mode at the third boss. But we'll have to see what they have up their sleeve as Azrock is already pulled back-to-back boss almost here.
Yeah, so I actually expect them, as soon as they get these Earth Ragers down, I expect them to pull the Taskmaster pack that you see on the left-hand side of the screen there, kind of out of line of sight. I expect them to pull it into Azrock because after these Earth Ragers are down, the boss doesn't really do anything. He kind of summons one Earth Rager every so often, but it's nothing really scary. And on the side of Team Pualuka, they're still getting their count at the very beginning of the instance, like we were saying, is more of a traditional route, making sure that they're getting all the Peacekeepers available to them and getting the most efficient count possible in the first half of the instance, because most of the time, you really don't want to pull the back half of the instance because the masterminds are super scary. But in this pack in front of Azrock is also super super scared with the Taskmaster because he doesn't take, he ends up casting an ability where he doesn't take any damage. So most of the time people like to not do it, but if you're getting a decent efficiency in terms of your cleave with Azerok, and then you get your Reaping into Azerok as well from that Taskmaster pack, it could actually be a pretty good pull, especially on the side of Method NA with this Unholy Death Knight.
Yeah, the Unholy Death Knight, and they're about to have their Bloodlust come up in 15 seconds here. Not the best, most optimal comp this meta we're seeing with a heavy melee for Azerok, as these Earth Ragers do chase targets and fixate on them, adding a stacking damage over time bleed that could get pretty out of hand, especially in this Tyrannical setting. So a bit of damage lost there as the melee had to deal with the first 4-pack at the start, but they are now in this kind of stable, almost boring part of the fight where nothing really happens. They just have to avoid the Tectonic Smash frontal, and as you mentioned, Tettles, indeed, they do pull that large pack of trash on top of the boss. Now, the most dangerous part here is not actually even the Taskmaster. He does a bit of damage on the tank, denies some damage done to the mobs with an AoE aura that decreases the damage taken. It's actually the Earth Shapers. Earth Shapers cast an Earth Shield on some mobs that, well, just Earth Shield we know gives you some healing and some absorb for these mobs here, but really the most dangerous thing is the cast on the tank. If any of those bolts go through, it could actually just nuke Nerf, which is part of why we saw him get so low in health in the first place.
Yeah, and you also do see the Wonton Zappers who actually end up killing themselves with Final Blast towards the end of the cast, forcing the melee out of melee range, because if somebody actually did get hit by the Final Blast, then they would instantly go down. You see the Earth Shields, they're actually able to get purged off, but obviously being an Alliance team, you don't have access to a purge unless you're like running a Unholy or a Demon Hunter or something like that. On the side of Team Pualuka, they actually have had their battle res available to them for about 2 or 3-ish minutes, and they're going to be pulling into coin-operated Pummeler, and they're going to be electing to pop their Bloodlust here.
Yeah, so Team Pualuka in a more traditional route here, 91% of trash done. They're going to be waiting for the first round of foot bombs to come out before likely pulling the trigger on that Bloodlust, as you mentioned. In just a moment, we see the first one come in here. Got you on the side. Immediately, you see the Spark Up coming up from the Bloodlust. So we'll have to see just how efficiently they get through that boss, as Nerf Clap, once again, just getting some struggles to get out of that 4-stack Grievous for Method NA, but JB does manage to stabilize him, or hopefully will manage to stabilize him in a second. I spoke too soon, and we see the 90% threshold finally go off, gets rid of that 4-stack, and most of the trash is done there too, as they proc their 4th Reaping Wave on top of Azerok, who is at 6% health now. Should be downing that in just a moment. They did really well with a lot of those kicks earlier for those Rock Lances coming out of the Geomancers.
Yeah, they end up using and pulling one Shale Biter that gave them just enough account to be able to push them over the edge and give themselves that Reaping into Azerok. I wonder if they could have pulled the Shale Biter solo as soon as Azerok went down, and then ending up shadow melting a lot of the Reaping off, if that would have been a little bit more efficient. But they do elect to use the bottom like 10-ish% of Azerok and use the Unholy Death Knight AoE to single target conversion damage metric in the form of Festermite, and then they do Bursting Swords as well, and try to cleave down Azerok with the bottom 10-ish%. But they seem like they end up wasting a lot of time killing this Reaping pack, and I think they would have just been better off shadow melding it.
Yeah, I'm not sure about this Reaping pack. Like, it was just not combined with anything. We often comment in every dungeon where I was looking for the next step with Reaping. What are they combining Reaping with? And here it really wasn't anything. They just kind of sat up there and killed it. Likely to be able to, well, do the skip that they're about to do down here. Only 80% trash on the board for them. Most other teams would actually be done with their final Reaping Wave here and run through all of this trash together. But it looks like they're actually killing some of this trash. Something we're going to comment on in a while, as we see. Oh, easy there. Let's get you some gravel. As we see actually the Mastermind being pulled as well. There's a lot of danger coming in here. Mastermind's kind of a mini boss style mob, just can't be CC'd. A lot of frontals, a lot of self-healing on the mob, but they just do a ton of damage and clean it all up. Decide, you know what, it's not as dangerous as we think, and we have enough burst damage and AoE crowd control to just get everything down before the casts get too out of hand. There's 93% on the board for Method NA, as Team Pualuka is just now finishing off with their coin-operated crowd pummeler, and a lot of damage coming out of that Windwalker monk there, Tettles.
Yeah, the Windwalker on the side of Team Pualuka actually gets a lot of damage on coin pummeler, and the reason for that being is he uses his Storm, Earth, and Fire charges whenever the boss does get the buff. So first buff is going to be Touch of Death plus Storm, Earth, and Fire, and then second buff is going to be the second Storm, Earth, and Fire charge, which allows the Windwalker monk to have insane amounts of burst. And then on the side of the Method NA, they're looking like they're pulling some more testers, some alchemists. Maybe there's a mastermind in there, but I don't think there actually is. I think it's just the testers and the alchemists here, which is a little bit safer of a pack because they don't have the reason that the masterminds are so annoying is they end up healing a ton with their leech globule, and additionally they actually they threaten your tank's life with the suck as well.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they do. A lot of damage that comes in from them, but also the rest of the trash. I mean, you have some of the caustic operators that cast the transformation, essentially, that you need to interrupt, otherwise they will transform into a globule themselves with max health. And then the Echo Blade as well from some of the mobs that just do a really frontal heavy damage and silence as well. So that's why we saw that kind of mini grip come out of Shakib there on the trash. Nonetheless, they finish off with their 5th Reaping Wave. A bit unconventional, but whatever works for Method NA is the name of the game as they aggro Rixa Flux Flame, the 3rd boss of the dungeon. Particularly dangerous boss, especially in this 19 Tyrannical setting, doing pure fire damage that's not blockable to the tank. But what is important is that you can spell reflect her chemical burns that go out on the 2 closest proximity targets.
Ooh, man, and Nerf is actually getting incredibly low there. He hit like 1% health, so him actually getting top back up, getting out of this 4-stack of Grievous is actually critically important. Not only can they actually spell reflect that dot, they're actually able to diffuse magic it too. So they're able to actually rotate a spell reflect and then a diffuse magic and then another spell reflect, and then they're going to rotate between dispels and then cloaks or AMSs and stuff like that in order to be able to not have that dot on the players.
I was just going to say, it certainly doesn't end there. This team has no lack of utility in terms of the chemical burns going out on this boss. Other general mechanics on this boss, of course, we all know, and for those of us that don't know, she will do 2 rounds of Azurite goop puddles on the ground that the players can bait with their location. Upon doing so, she will do a propellant blast, as we see here, baited in the direction of one of the players. You want to make sure you aim it towards those piles on the ground to kind of clean up the platform and have as much real estate as possible when kiting the boss in circles. Some of the area denial will come, unfortunately, not at your control. There are some pipes that shoot lines of the goop across. We can see some on the side of the screen for Method NA. Team Poluka still clawing at the bosses, trying to catch up. Azurok now at 50%. We know how long that boss takes, and they've already dealt with their 5th Reaping Wave. Nerf Clap getting chunked here by the fire damage from Rixa once again as they move out of the next puddle.
Yeah, basically, if you actually didn't have Spell Reflect on Protection Warrior, I don't think any tank is actually super good at tanking these chemical burns, as they do a significant amount of magic damage. But just the fact that Nerf on the Protection Warrior, they do have access to Spell Reflect for every other chemical burn is actually super important. They also have AMS, the Anti-Magic Shell coming out from the Unholy Death Knight, and Cloak of Shadows coming out from the Outlaw Rogue as well.
JB a bit on the back foot there, falling behind with Grievous stacks, decides it's time to pull out the Tranquility and does so, getting the rest of the group topped up, making sure they get out of that 3 to 4 stack Grievous that some of the members found themselves in. Rixa now down to the single digits of percentage as they move out of the next pile and have an unfortunate line of goop fall on them, but no damage for the team, no worries for the team, dealing well to get in there for the chemical burn. We see that the tank and, of course, Lighty are the closest people to Rixa to make sure they absorb those 2 chemical burns. Boss keels over and they get ready for the final trash skip leading up to the final boss.
So typically people end up just kind of death skipping at some point of this because there are a lot of mobs that do have True Sight here. But if you're able to pat through and you do have good, if you do have good patrols on this back half of the instance, you're actually able to avoid all the True Sight from the mobs here. However, you do see Nerf popping the Lightfoot, everybody running through, and they're going to be popping their Night Elf Shadow Meld Racial as soon as they are out of line of sight and far enough away from these mobs that they don't have True Sight on them.
Perfect skip coming out of there, coming out of Method NA there, excuse me, and 0 deaths on the board. Team Poluka is so far behind at this point, as they're only now running up to Rixa Flux Flame, the boss we just saw Method NA kill on the side. They have 3 deaths on the board to boot, so it's going to take an absolute miracle for Team Poluka to catch up here in the form of a Method NA wipe, but they know this boss inside and out as they start phase 1 here. You can imagine this platform as a kind of 3x3 grid, and you will have these floating heads on the side that will deny you 1 column and 1 row of that 3x3 grid platform. So the problem is the boss, of course, is very stubborn to move because of the frequent cast of Gatling gun and homing missile on the ranged targets. So very important for the tank to have a good look at where these heads are positioned and pre-position the boss. Excellent view here from our observers to kind of illustrate the facts we were talking about.
Yeah, and you actually do see on the side of Method NA, they actually have 6 markers down, so they're able to communicate with one another where the safe spots are from these Boomba bombs as well, whenever they are dropping that area denial effect on the ground as well. Once you do get Raz Dunk, he will be phasing soon here in a couple seconds, and he's going to be flying up into the air and dropping these he's going to be dropping these oil drums down onto the ground, and then he's going to be coming down and trying to slam on top of them. And then once you do get 3 of the oil drums drop down on, he will actually phase out of that phase.
They are smacking this boss so hard that his head is spinning in circles. Method NA about to enter 50% here on Mogul Raz Dunk. As you mentioned, now we will have 2 Heartseekers come out, 2 ads come out that cast Heartseeker. Now, the dangerous thing here is that whoever intercepts them will take a nice chunk of damage, but also take 35% less healing. So oftentimes the tank does opt to step in the way of these to diminish the amount of damage that goes out on the group, but too much is too much sometimes, especially if JB starts to have to play catch-up with the healing from Grievous. We do see the pillars finally go down as the team gets ready to bait the boss with his drill into those pillars. Upon breaking all 3 of them, you will get out of this 99% reduced damage phase and re-enter phase 1.
Yeah, and you do see Yoda there getting that arrow on top of his head, baiting Mogul Razdunk onto it, popping the drill smash, getting the first oil drum knocked out here. And you do see the 2 Sky Scorchers getting killed as well, making your tank and allowing him to be in a significantly better position in terms of how much damage he's taking. He's actually been kiting around. We've seen Nerf just been kiting around the mobs the whole entire time, not face tanking them for prolonged periods of time. And on the side of Team Puluka, they're getting Ricks of Flux Flame incredibly low, but it would require a miracle here for Method NA to end up losing this one.
A good old Christmas miracle, which won't happen because it is April right now. Team Poluka down to 3% on Ricks of Flux Flame, just too little too late as Mogul Razdunk enters the second phase 1 for Method NA, who starts to move him intelligently between some of these markers, making their life a lot easier to deal with, dodging those missiles from the side Boomba bots. Mogul down to 30%. They're just going to have to play this exactly like phase 1. No new mechanics here, and they'll have this in the bag in a moment.
Yeah, and once Mogul Razdunk actually does hit 0%, he summons the man that's inside of him, who has like almost no health, so he instantly dies. But as soon as Mogul Razdunk dies, the fight isn't exactly over.
Not the best of positioning there for the team, as Lighty does go down. It's just kind of a bit of insult to injury at the end to an otherwise almost perfect run. Immediate battle rest comes up. They did have 3 of them available, but there's one of those situations where they didn't really pre-position the boss very well, so they kind of were swarmed by a crisscross from those Boomba bots. Mogul now down to almost 10%, excuse me, as it has only now been aggroed from Team Poluka, who also has a 2 death deficit in their not in their favor.
Yeah, an absolute clank that we did see Method NA present here today, putting up the reason why that they were so successful in Motherlode during their time trial runs, making sure that they assert themselves as the only NA team that's going to stay in the upper bracket here.
And that's going to be it as Method NA takes the series 2-1. The boss comes out for just a second, as Tettles mentioned, and flops right over. Method NA advance in the upper bracket.